fearing that more people might have started talking about her strange habits. As she approached her classroom, Adaobi overheard a group of students talking near the entrance. Among them was Amaka, still bitter from the lunch incident. "I heard someone say she's hiding her face because she's actually rich," Amaka said with a smirk, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. Adaobi froze in place, her heart pounding. She had worked so hard to keep her true identity a secret, but now it seemed like rumors were beginning to spread. She quickly turned and hurried down a different hallway, trying to escape the situation before anyone saw her. Adaobi's quick exit didn't go unnoticed. Chinedu, who had arrived early to study, saw her rushing down the hall. Concerned, he followed her, catching up just as she ducked into a quiet corner near the library. "Hey, are you okay?" Chinedu asked, his voice full of genuine concern. Adaobi looked up at him, unsure of what to say. She wasn't ready to reveal everything yet, but she appreciated his kindness. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just trying to avoid some rumors." Chinedu nodded, sensing there was more to the story, but didn't push her for details. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here," he said softly, offering a reassuring smile. The school assembly hall was packed with students, all dressed in their neatly pressed uniforms, sitting row by row. The principal stood at the front, giving a speech about the importance of hard work and discipline. Adaobi sat near the back, her face mask securely in place. She had pulled the hood of her hoodie low over her face, hoping to blend into the crowd. As the principal continued to speak, Adaobi tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the rumors Amaka had started. She could feel the eyes of some students on her, whispering and glancing her way. In the middle of the principal's speech, Amaka stood up from her seat near the front of the hall. "Excuse me, sir," she said loudly, interrupting the principal. The entire hall fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. Adaobi's heart raced as she saw Amaka looking directly in her direction. "There's someone here who isn't being honest with us," Amaka continued, her voice filled with confidence. The principal looked confused, but he allowed her to continue. Adaobi could feel her face growing hot under the mask. She had to get out of there before Amaka exposed her secret in front of the whole school. Before Amaka could say anything more, Adaobi quietly slipped out of her seat and made her way toward the exit at the back of the hall. She kept her head down, moving quickly but carefully so she wouldn't draw attention. Just as she reached the door, she bumped into someone. Looking up, she saw it was Chinedu. He looked surprised but didn't say anything. Instead, he gently guided her out of the hall without a word. Together, they hurried down the hallway and into an empty classroom. Once inside, Adaobi pulled off her mask, breathing heavily. "Thank you," she whispered, grateful for Chinedu's quiet help. Inside the quiet, empty classroom, Adaobi sat on one of the desks, her hands trembling as she rested her face in them. The room was small and filled with desks and chairs neatly arranged, but the quiet felt heavy with tension. Chinedu stood nearby, leaning against the wall, watching her with concern. Adaobi's heart was pounding and her mind raced. The weight of her secret felt heavier than ever after what had just happened in the assembly. She knew she couldn't keep hiding the truth much longer. With a deep breath, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chinedu, there's something I need to tell you." Chinedu stepped closer, sensing the seriousness of her words. He sat on the desk next to her, his expression soft and understanding. "You can trust me," he said gently, encouraging her to continue. Adaobi hesitated, looking down at her hands as she fidgeted nervously. "I'm not who you think I am," she started, her voice shaky. "I've been pretending to be someone else. I wear this mask, not because I'm sick or anything, but because I don't want people to know who I really am." She lifted her head to meet his eyes, searching for a reaction. Chinedu's face remained calm, though his eyes were filled with curiosity and concern. Adaobi took a deep breath before continuing. "I come from a wealthy family, Chinedu, but I didn't want anyone to treat me differently because of it. I've seen how people act around rich kids. They only care about money, not the person behind it. So I hide who I am at school to see who would care about me for me." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "But now, with these rumors, I'm scared that everything is going to fall apart." Chinedu listened carefully, his expression softening even more. He reached out, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "I don't care about who your family is, Adaobi. I care about you," he said softly. The school day was coming to an end, and Adaobi felt the weight of her confession lingering in the air. She and Chinedu walked side by side down the now empty hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the walls. Adaobi was relieved to have finally shared her secret with someone, but a new anxiety gnawed at her. What would happen next? Would Chinedu still treat her the same? As they reached the school gates, Chinedu turned to her with a gentle smile, as if sensing her unease. "Don't worry, Adaobi, your secret's safe with me," he said reassuringly. Just as they stepped outside, Amaka and her group of friends appeared at the gates, clearly waiting for Adaobi. Amaka's smirk grew wider when she saw them walking together. "Look who we have here," Amaka sneered, her voice loud and mocking. "The girl who hides behind her mask." Her friends snickered, their laughter cruel and cutting. Adaobi's heart sank, and for a moment she considered running away again, but she remembered Chinedu's words and his quiet support. She took a deep breath and stood her ground, her gaze steady as she faced Amaka. Chinedu stepped forward, his expression serious as he confronted Amaka. "Why do you care so much about Adaobi's life?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Amaka blinked in surprise, clearly not expecting anyone to stand up to her. "Everyone has the right to their privacy," Chinedu continued, "and spreading rumors isn't going to help anyone." Amaka's smirk faltered, and her friends grew quiet. Adaobi felt a surge of gratitude toward Chinedu for defending her, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of strength building inside her. The next day at school, Adaobi entered the hallways with a mix of nervousness and determination. She noticed the way people whispered and glanced in her direction. The rumors that Amaka had been spreading were still in the air, but after yesterday's confrontation, they didn't bother her as much. Adaobi held her head high, determined to no longer hide. She had Chinedu's support, and she was ready to face whatever came next. As she walked down the hallway, a few students looked at her with curiosity, but some even smiled. It was a small but powerful sign that things were changing. In the classroom, Adaobi sat down at her desk, her eyes briefly meeting Amaka's across the room. Amaka looked away quickly, clearly unsettled after the confrontation from the previous day. The power dynamics in the room had shifted, and Adaobi could feel it. No longer was she the girl who hid behind a mask. She was beginning to reclaim her identity. She glanced over at Chinedu, who gave her an encouraging nod. His quiet strength reassured her that she wasn't alone in this. During the break, a small group of students approached Adaobi. For a moment, she tensed, expecting more ridicule, but instead, one of them smiled shyly. "Hey, Adaobi, we just wanted to say that we think what you did yesterday was brave," the girl said. Adaobi blinked in surprise, her heart warming at the unexpected kindness. The others nodded in agreement, and she felt the walls she had built around herself slowly crumbling. "Thanks," Adaobi replied softly, a small but genuine smile forming on her face. The rumors that once held her back were now beginning to fade. Amaka sat in the back of the class, staring at Adaobi, who was laughing with some classmates. It had been days since the confrontation, and yet Amaka couldn't shake the discomfort in her chest. Something about the way Adaobi stood up for herself, with Chinedu by her side, had bothered Amaka. She wasn't used to being challenged like that, especially not by someone she thought she could easily intimidate. As Amaka watched Adaobi, she realized something. The rumors, the mocking, the bullying, none of it had really made her feel better. If anything, it only made her feel more isolated. During lunch, Amaka sat alone in the cafeteria, pushing her food around on her plate. Her friends, who used to follow her every word, had become distant since the confrontation. She could feel their judgmental looks, like they were waiting for her next move. But Amaka wasn't sure what to do anymore. The truth was, she envied Adaobi, not because of her wealth or popularity, but because she had the courage to be vulnerable and the strength to stand up for herself. It was something Amaka had never been able to do. She realized now that her bullying had been a way to mask her own insecurities. Later that day, Amaka approached Adaobi in the hallway. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a deep breath. She wasn't used to apologizing, especially not to someone like Adaobi. But this time was different. "Adaobi," Amaka said, her voice quieter than usual. Adaobi turned around, surprised to see Amaka standing there alone. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I shouldn't have treated you that way." Adaobi blinked, caught off guard by the apology. After a brief pause, she nodded and gave a small smile. "Thank you, Amaka," she replied softly. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough to start healing old wounds. The days following Amaka's apology were strange, but in a good way. Adaobi never expected to feel sympathy toward Amaka, but something about the way she apologized had softened her heart. At first, they didn't speak much after the apology. They would exchange polite smiles in the hallway, but there was still a distance between them. One afternoon, Adaobi was walking to her next class when she noticed Amaka standing by herself near the school garden. After a moment's hesitation, Adaobi approached her. "Hey, Amaka," she said, her voice friendly. Amaka looked up, surprised but relieved to see her. "Hi, Adaobi," she replied with a small smile. They sat together on a bench in the garden, the sunlight filtering through the trees above them. It was quiet, and for a while, neither of them said anything. Then Amaka broke the silence. "I never told anyone this, but I've always felt like I had to prove myself. That's why I acted the way I did." Adaobi listened carefully, nodding as Amaka continued to speak. She realized that Amaka wasn't the confident bully she had always seemed to be. She was just a girl who had been hiding behind her own insecurities, much like Adaobi had hidden behind her mask. "You don't have to pretend anymore," Adaobi said softly. "I get it." From that day on, things slowly began to change between Adaobi and Amaka. They weren't exactly best friends, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They started sitting together during lunch, talking about school and life in a way that was surprisingly easy. Chinedu would often join them, and Adaobi couldn't help but notice how even Amaka seemed more relaxed in his presence. For the first time in a long while, Adaobi felt like she had found a real connection with someone she never expected to understand. It was the beginning of an unexpected but genuine friendship. It was just another day in class when the teacher announced a new project. Adaobi listened carefully as he explained that the assignment would require teamwork. Then came the part everyone dreaded: random partners. As the teacher began calling out names, Adaobi held her breath. "Adaobi and Amaka," the teacher said, looking at both girls. The entire class fell silent, clearly remembering their past rivalry. Adaobi glanced over at Amaka, who was also looking back at her. There was a brief moment of tension before they both gave each other a small nod, signaling that they were ready to work together. Later that afternoon, Adaobi and Amaka met in the library to start planning their project. The air between them was a little awkward at first, but they soon began discussing their ideas. Surprisingly, their thoughts aligned. As they talked about the project's theme, they discovered they had more in common than they had realized. "I think we should focus on something that represents growth," Amaka suggested, her voice more confident than before. Adaobi nodded, smiling. "That's a great idea. It's kind of like what's happening between us," she said, a hint of humor in her tone. Amaka laughed softly, and the tension melted away.
Drop your comment at the comment section below, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share. See you on the next episode. Bye for now.